Okay, welcome. We are now going to be talking about, let me get the video set up here for the, okay, welcome. We're going to be talking today about interview techniques. This is a follow-on in a series regarding our personal adult level skills as far as resume building. We have another YouTube video about resume building that feeds right into interview techniques. I'm going to go through the philosophy of an interview. And again, this is an adult level interview. This can go from anywhere, interviewing from Walmart or Target, but seriously as high as just last period we had the superintendent of education from Prescott School District in here. Guess what? He had to interview for his job. It was an extensive interview. He used a lot of these techniques we're talking about. When I came here to Prescott High School and I started the ROTC, and then the principal looked around and said, hey, there's no one to run for the ROTC for me to be in charge, I still went through a pretty extensive interview process with Ms. McCraley, and I used every one of these techniques. Okay, so I'm telling you the techniques of actually doing an interview. The next in this series will be, I hope to have a guinea pig student down here, and I will go through a serious interview with them and give them constructive criticism online. So, interview techniques. I'm going to go over today, basically, talk about how you use your resume that you just built. I'm going to talk about your pregame prior to walking into an interview, exactly what you need to do to be prepared for it. I'm going to talk about your dress and appearance, your conduct. I'll give you some hints on some questions and types of interviews you'll have. Oh, by the way, your generation of students has different types of interviews than white-haired old men like me with our generation, and it's kind of a little different. Okay, first of all, the resume. When you show up for your interview, you find out how many people are going to be there. Okay, generally nowadays you submit the resume electronically, but I submit to you also. You want to walk in with a piece of paper, and it's generally, you just don't want a piece of paper out like this. What I think is quite professional is to have it in a manila envelope. Have it in an envelope or a folder, a folder, so that you can walk in with your folder. You know it's clean, you know it's not messed up, and you can tell that you actually prepared for it. And then you open it up and you actually give it to each person sitting at the interview. If they tell you, we don't want a resume, send it to us electronically, I would still bring one, okay? Because there may be somebody who shows up and, oh, I forgot to bring it, or I don't have my laptop or my tablet there to actually look at it. But they want to see an interview with a resume. And I'm telling you, this goes anywhere from Target to my son, Ryan, was 12 years old, and he was getting his first job as a counselor at a Boy Scout camp. And guess what? He didn't know anybody. He didn't know the bosses. He knew no one at the camp, but he wanted to work at R-Bar C up near Payson. And as a 12-year-old kid, okay, 6th grade, I made him have a resume. And he went to the person in charge as a 12-year-old kid and gave the lady a resume, and she talked to him about it, and he got the job. After the job at the camp, the lady talked to him about the fact that he was the first kid to show up with a resume. There you go. I'm just saying you need to have the resume. It needs to be good. We talked about the resume in the past class. No spelling errors, easily readable, 12 to 14 font. Okay, so that blind people like me can still read it real easy, not too showy, and also has to be relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. So you come into the resume, you have your resume, you come into your interview, you need to make sure you also go through your pre-game show for your interview. What can you do prior to walking into the interview that can help you out?
Practice in front of a mirror.
Practice in front of a mirror. Do that. I mean, seriously, ask your buddies, gee, what do you think the guy at Walmart's going to ask me? Hey, has anybody ever talked to a friend who's working at Subway and say, hey, what did the manager ask you when they went to your interview? That's a huge difference. Your pregame show of your interview, a lot of times will determine whether or not you get the job, guys. I'm telling you. For instance, I have a son that goes to the school in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania. He's 20 years old, Luke, went through an interview process about 2 weeks ago of, a student-led organization. It's actually a student bank at University of Pennsylvania. So it's a real bank, real money, run by students. Okay, it's kind of crazy. So he had to interview as a teller. He's a sophomore. But his interview process, he talked to some of the kids who had actually been through the interviews before to figure out what the process was. And he was prepared somewhat for it. I mean, he had his resume, everything built. But actually going into the interview, he knew it wasn't going to be an old person sitting down interviewing. It was going to be his peers. Do you think they interviewed differently? What kind of interview do you think young people have?
Different.
More laid back interview?
More laid back? Well, actually, no. You had to dress in coat and tie. And oh, by the way, these are sharp people. And they're running a bank with real money. It was very difficult. But some of the questions that I ask all the time when I'm interviewing someone for the Air Force Academy, that's not what peers ask peers when they're interviewing for a 20-year-old job. For instance, in your generation, a lot of times it's mental games. They want to see whether or not you're sharp. So they may sit down and say, okay, glad to see you, Melanie Smith, good to see you. Would you please take the number 253 and divide it by 37 and tell us what the answer is to hundreds? You got 30 seconds.
14.
You think I'm kidding, but then they said there are 5 people look at you for 30 seconds to see if you could do that in your mind. Okay? But you know what? If she can't do it in her brain, do you want her to work with money when you have 17 other applicants? So I'm just saying the interviews may be different, but you should know that prior to walking in there. Another question for a younger, like Google. If you go work for Google, they're going to look at your resume. Everybody's sharp. Everybody's got 4.0s. Everybody's got experience. But they want to know whether you close your eyes. Think about an analog clock that says 3:15. What is the angle between the hour hand and the minute hand? You have 30 seconds. And you have 5 people looking at you.
Straight.
Straight is not an angle.
I know.
I'm just saying, those are the type of mental questions you may be going through. Of course, the answer is, it's not straight. It's not 3:15, because at 15, that analog has already clicked a quarter of the way past 3 towards 4. And they may ask you, Luke, they asked him for the complementary angle. What does the complementary angle mean? It means the opposite one of 180, yes. And so anyway, these are mental games. Your questions may be mental games. When you're a teenager in this town going to work for Target, they're not going to ask you those questions. But they may ask you, give me an example of you being organized. Give me an example of what happens if you're going to be late to class. If your car breaks down, are you just going to show up late, Cadet Perkins? The answer is no. I'm going to call you and tell you I'm going to be late. I'm going to be professional. That's the type of things to do. You will find this out in the pregame. All right, that's great. You're going to talk to people, know what kind of interview it is. What else can you learn in a pregame before you walk in to be interviewed? Yes, sir.
What you should wear?
What you should wear. Exactly. The general idea for interviews is you want to be dressed as good as the people interviewing you. But if you're dressed better, it does not hurt. It can never hurt you. Okay? And generally, it might make you, might be a little better. Okay? So when you go and interview, has anybody ever seen RV Vacation? Okay, the movie, when one of the, they have different interviews for different people. If you're interviewing for a young organization, a technological thing, everybody may be in jeans, maybe in t-shirts, and that doesn't mean you show up in jeans and t-shirts for the interview, unless they tell you they want to see that. Otherwise, you should dress professionally. It can never hurt you. All right, what else on your pregame show? What else could you learn to help you in the interview before you walk into any organization?
Their name.
Excuse me?
The interviewer's name.
Interviewer's name, yes. And if I have a name of anybody nowadays, Denny Peoples, what can you do to find out more about Denny Peoples?
Google.
Ding, 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 ding. And I promise you, if the person's working for Google or Target or Subway, heck, if the Subway manager here who owns Subway, who may be interviewing you, you Google their name, you're going to find out they own 7 Subways. Would that help you if you go into the interview?
Yes.
You're sitting there talking to you, and then at the very end of every interview, they're going to say, hey, you got any questions? You go, gee, sir, you own 7 Subways. How do you do it? And the guy will go, huh, that person looked me up. He knew something pretty good, right? That's pretty good. I interview people for the Air Force Academy. I am incredibly impressed when at the very end I go, hey, you got any questions for me? He goes, well, how'd you like flying the F-4 and the F-15? How'd the guy even know that? Well, he looked me up. He looked me up on tell me how you started the junior ROTC at Prescott. They can find that on the internet. You should also think about the organization. If you're going to work for Target, how many Targets are in Prescott? Where's the closest? How many people work there? You know, what are they doing? Do they have a big push for Christmas? Well, it's coming up. You know, maybe that's what you're being hired for. So you need to do all your pregame, and that will really determine your dress and appearance. When you come into the interview, in America, of course, we're talking American interviews, which are different from other countries, but it's very, very important to stand up, Cadet Nick Van Booten, stand up. In America, you need to shake hands, and that was a weak handshake. Squeak. Yeah. Oh, we heard me there. All right, that was good. So you did a great job. So you want to have a firm handshake. Not a crushing handshake, but a firm one, okay? And you need to look the person straight in the eye. I've had one person in, how long have I been doing it? 10 years? 8 years? One person in 9 years come interview for the Air Force Academy and they wouldn't look me in the eye. That's kind of weird. I mean, the person a straight A student who's testing well, trying to be a leader of America, and he wouldn't look you in the eye. He didn't get a very good recommendation, and I kind of wondered about that. Okay, I kind of wondered about that. And by the way, that was a white person, a white Anglo-European background person. Other cultures, such as Navajos, have different cultural indications, and sometimes they don't look you in the eye. I mean, that's their culturally. They have to learn that, and I counsel them and teach them that. So when you go to an interview, you need to know your background, who you're working with, and you want to look them straight in the eye and be confident. That's part of your appearance. You're coming in with your resume, you're already prepared. You need to think about your conduct and the questions that are coming. We talked about the different types of questions. All right, let's role play. My first job was interviewing in a steak restaurant like Applebee's, except it was private, or the Cattleman's restaurant, something like that here in town. And I was interviewing to clean bathrooms, to be the janitor, okay? So what kind of questions do you think would come up? Yes, sir.
Are you hardworking?
Am I hardworking? Exactly. So somebody asks you, are you hardworking? What would you answer, Cadet Barrios? Yes. I would say yes, sir, okay? Because I'm a militaristic person, and oh, by the way, in the South, Arizona is kind of different, but in the rest of America, when you say sir and ma'am, it's very well respected. It's expected. Matter of fact, if you said yes in South Carolina, would you hire her? No, because she's going to disrespect the people coming into the place if you just say yes. That's your part of your conduct you need to think about, okay? All right, so let's try again. Are you hardworking?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, give me an example of you being hardworking. Okay? Is it good to say, I don't know at an interview?
No, sir.
Well, you can, right? If he asks you a question, says, hey, tell me 3 times that you failed on a project, you might want to say, instead of I don't know, you might want to say, well, do you mind if I take a moment to think about that? What does that tell you as an interviewer? Yes.
It doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't happen very often, but the kid doesn't want to just spurt out something. They're trying to think about it and be intelligent, right? They're not going to lie to you. I've had 2 people actually apply to the Air Force Academy and lied to me. What do you think about that? Would you hire somebody? You got 17 other people applying for a job, and they come into an interview for $400,000 and they lie to you? That's kind of a bummer. That's a breach of integrity. Okay, so on your interview with your conduct, be professional, look them in the eye. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, sir, do you mind if, let me think about that a second. That shows that you're processing it, okay, and that you're actually working on it. How about cell phones? What if your mama texts you or your boyfriend texts you in the middle of the interview? Should you answer?
No, sir.
I've had that happen in an interview for the Air Force Academy. I was sitting in another school interviewing someone. Cell phone came on, just like I'm sure everybody pulls it out, starts texting right here, and I'm looking at them. Yeah. And they just went normal. Does the interviewer have a positive impression on you?
No.
If you're going to be the host at a restaurant and making above minimum wage, and your mama or your boyfriend or girlfriend texts you and you're trying to represent the restaurant, they just told me that you're last priority. I didn't give that person that person's not at the Air Force Academy. To not know. So what would I advise about cell phones before you even walk to an interview?
Turn them off.
I mean, turn them off. Not just mute it so it just vibrates there. I've had that happen. Be in an interview, think of brrr. The person doesn't answer it. Brrr. Brrr. It keeps vibrating. How does that make me feel? Obviously, they don't care about the interview or their mama or whoever's trying to get in touch with them. So yes, turn them off. If during the interview they give you a thought question that you can't figure out, you can say, hey, do you mind if I use my phone? I think that's acceptable, because that shows you're resourceful and you can figure stuff out. But I would not have the cell phones in there, okay? Let's see. Questions, other questions about your integrity, your resume. Everything on your resume needs to be perfect. I think I told you, I can't remember which class, but I actually had a resume from a student that once said they were in National Honor Society. And I looked at their GPA, and it was 3.6, which in this school, you can't be in the National Honor Society and you have a 3.8. So I said, well, tell me about some of your National Honor Society stuff. And the person goes, oh, yeah, well, I went and pitched up trash, and we worked on the weekend. And I was thinking, but his GPA is 3.6, but he can't be in the National Honor Society unless he has 3.8, but he says the National Honor Society. So I let it go. I walked out of the interview. Of course, all teachers know everybody. I called up the person in the National Honor Society. Hey, is Bob in the National Honor Society? Nope. So the kid lied to me in the middle of the interview? You've got to be kidding me. So I actually confronted that person. I asked him about it. And you know what the answer was? Oh, well, my friend Cody was in the National Honor Society. I went with him and helped him pick up some trash. But it said on the resume, National Honor Society. Okay, so that's a bald-faced lie. Okay, that's a lie. That's not good. So, my point is, on your resume, of course, be 100% honest and be able to talk to everything on the resume. We talked about the resume. It shouldn't be 6 font, 8 font, and have everything in there. It should say, I have a job at during the rodeo during the summer. And I'm sitting here as an interview. I go, well, tell me about your job at the rodeo during the summer. Or tell me about working on your uncle's ranch. That was a question I had just last month. And so that way you tell them about it. They're looking for you talking. They're looking for you to be important. In the questions, you should have a clue about the job you're getting. So if I'm interviewing as a janitor for a steakhouse, I knew that I would be working on the weekends. Okay? So they say, hey, do you have any problems working on the weekends? No, sir. I'd love to work on the weekends. I'll tell you. And during college, I went to interview. I was a bartender and a waiter during college. That's how I got some money to get through Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And I'll tell you the exact question. This is pretty interesting. Of course, this was back in 1980, back before the word gay came out. We never knew what gay was. We talked about homosexuals, okay? But I was a good bartender and waiter. I was real good. and I went to interview for the nicest restaurant in Atlanta. And I was interviewed, I was a college kid, I was ROTC, I was Georgia Tech, I was a civil engineer, and I had about 5 years of experience. So I went to interview for the nicest restaurant in Atlanta. And I knew at that time there were a lot of gays, what we called homosexuals back then, worked at the restaurant. I didn't care. I wanted to make money, right? I mean, I wanted to work for the best restaurant in Atlanta. But during the interview, I sat there and looked across to this guy, and he goes, "Oh, well, you're real qualified." No, he goes, "But, Denny, do you have any problem working with people with diverse background?" What was he asking about? He knew that I was at Georgia Tech, that I was going to be a fighter pilot, and I probably wasn't gay, but he was asking me to my face, "Do you have any problems working with people with diverse backgrounds?" Well, guess what? My answer was, because I had done my research, I had friends that worked there. I had done my research, and I looked at him straight in the eye and go, "If I did, I wouldn't be coming here for a job." You think he hired me?
Yes.
Boom. I was hired. He goes, "Great, can you be here at 5 o'clock? I go, "Yes, sir, I'll be there. No problem." It was really cool. We showed up at 5 o'clock. We ate all the food that we served that night. And it was pretty amazing. I waited on famous people, in Atlanta that came through. It was really cool. So anyway, my point is, that one time I did the right thing. I've done plenty of other bad things. Honesty and thank yous. Okay, questions. I'm sorry. Should you in an interview talk about money?
No.
No, that's part of your research. Okay, if he says, "Well, this is a minimum paying job," then you say, "Okay, well, thank you, sir." And then he said, "But you know what? In 6 months, we'll reevaluate you. Maybe we'll give you a $1 raise or something like that." In the first interview, in the first impression, you should not ask about this, okay? If they call you back and offer you the job, and they have not talked about money at all at that point, it's fair for you to say, "Well, sir, I appreciate the offer. Can you tell me how much it pays?" And that may confirm with you what you know from your friends. And if it's different, then you don't worry. When I first went and talked to Ms. McCraley about my job, I didn't say, "How am I going to make $30,000? Am I going to make $35,000? I didn't ask her about that. Okay, I had an idea of what teachers pay. It's all online, right? There's no secrets. Okay, so don't ask about questions unless they ask you. If they say, "Well, Andrew, how much do you think you're going to be paid?" What do you answer?
Minimum wage rate.
You have an answer. Whatever. You talk confidently. Say, "Sir, I'd be happy to just make minimum wage to get going and prove myself to you so I can get a raise in the future." Sounds good, right? I mean, same thing. Okay. Okay. At the end, when you finished your interview, thank you very much. They're always going to ask you at the end, "Do you have any questions for them?" And you should always have one question or two. Perfectly, you have one question about the individual as a person. Colonel Peeples, tell me about, flying jets. I always thought that was a cool thing. Ms. McCraley, golly, what brought you from Yuma, Arizona, all the way up here to Prescott? That's what I asked her because I researched her. I realized she was in Yuma. She was the first female principal hired here in Prescott. Has it always been tough for you to be a female principal here? How did you do it? I mean, that way she knew that I researched her. So I have one question about the interviewer, and then my technique is also have a question about the organization. At that time, when I was interviewed here, Prescott was booming. And I said, "How are you going to hire all these new teachers? Because we're going to have over 2,000 kids." Okay? At the very end, you walk out, and I really believe in writing a physical thank you note to the individuals. If you do that, you will get the job. Because your generation does not write physical thank you notes. And if you do it for old people, you will get the job. Okay? That will conclude right now. We'll go through an interview with someone else next time. And we will be ready for this